Prime Minister-designate Mark Carney and his cabinet. They are set to be sworn in on Friday, is what sources tell us. Today, the new Liberal leader met with some important players on Team Canada. First up, a breakfast meeting with Ontario Premier Doug Ford to discuss the trade war. And then Carney visited a Hamilton steel mill that will be hit by the latest tariffs, where Carney said he's willing to meet with the president under certain circumstances.
And I'm ready to sit down with President Trump at the appropriate time under a position where there's respect for Canadian sovereignty.
Carney and his team have also been getting briefed and are meeting and having conversations with potential cabinet ministers to get ready for this official transition that's going to happen early on Friday. That's where we're going to go next with the power panel. So, Tim, let's start there. The transition is imminent. It's going to be happening on Friday after the foreign ministers meet and tomorrow, and the finance minister's off to Washington. I mean, what do you expect on day one? Where do you think things go when Carney officially moves into the job?
Before we go there, can I just say, the good people of Charlevoix, if you're watching, let Marco Rubio know how we feel about this 51st state option. Certainly the good people of Quebec City didn't have troubles when George W. Bush came there for a G20 years ago, telling them how they felt about him. And we know that Charlevoix hasn't always been the nicest place for people like Donald Trump because he didn't like when Justin Trudeau and he got into a dust-up there. So go Charlevoix, go. You got Canada on your back here. As for the transition, look, I think, you know, Mark Carney is telegraphing where he is going to go and what the electoral strategy, as he views it, for winning is, and that's staying hard on this issue that is dominating everything around around how Donald Trump is treating Canada. I wonder, David, if in the early days, and they may only be a matter of days, because we could have an election called this time next week, what Mark Carney does. It'll be the first few days will be fascinating. You know, is there a meeting with foreign leaders which showcases what he believes is his electoral proposition, respected and having power around the globe? Does he try to do something like that before going off into the campaign trail? Because where he wins in data, at least right now, is in people believing he has the competency to stand up to Donald Trump. So I would imagine, as he did today, that will continue to be something they'll look to play out and use the days they have as prime minister before an election is called to make that their great advantage. The other thing I'll be looking for is, because I understand part of what the Carney team wants to do is create this separation with the Trudeau government, because that's been an effective line of attack for Pierre Poilievre. Will there be new faces in that cabinet that aren't members of caucus? Will this so-called war cabinet be sworn in, or will people be putting up their hands and announcing they're running and not necessarily end up in caucus? So that will be something to watch on Friday and over the weekend. Yeah,
Louis Blouin and I were talking the other day that Jean Charest was apparently asked to come in and said no. Michelle's old boss, Christy Clark, as someone has mentioned. Michelle, if you got any intel on that, feel free to spill the beans here on the show as someone who might be getting sworn in. But it sounds like a smaller, leaner cabinet, Jordan, and I'm serious, Michelle, if you do want to say anything, that we're going to see on Friday with the real urgent focus of getting through this crisis with Donald Trump and trade.
This is the cabinet that Trudeau should have put together in December, really. And that's exactly what Carney's going to do. He's here for a good time, not a long time
he's a trooper
in this role. And so he needs to indicate the maximum change from the Liberal government of Trudeau as he possibly can. And, you know, I think maybe just to build a bit on what Tim is saying, I think today what they were doing was generally very good. The visuals of having him out there on the factory floor in Hamilton, meeting with people who are affected. He's saying a lot of the right things. He was out talking about how any income that Canada brings in from tariffs should be going directly to workers. That's something that Singh and the NDP have been calling for. I think the only rub there is that, of course, he is about to become prime minister. And so there's now an issue where we are potentially waiting 6 weeks, maybe 2 months until the conclusion of an election. But people are going to need help immediately. And what the government has done so far has been extremely minimal. They've just talked about expanding some flexibility flexibility around existing EI work sharing programs. It's not enough. We already know that there are layoffs happening. So I think you're going to see an increase in pressure on him to bring in some measures right now, while he is Prime Minister, before we go to an election, to help people who are impacted.
I don't see a world where the legislature comes back, though. If
I don't necessarily see that world either, but I think, certainly there's been across the board indication that people will be willing to work with him to bring that help to people if they need it right now, which they do.
Okay. Sherelle, what's your expectation? I mean, we keep hearing a smaller, leaner cabinet, maybe with people who aren't elected, but presumably would run in the next election, right? Or that would have to be a condition there. Most of the key players staying where they are or adjusting slightly, but what are you hearing? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, we are in a trade war, so you cannot have like a whole scale, clear the bench and everybody. I think that's the wrong metaphor, but you know what I mean. You can't just wipe the slate clean and say, okay, this is my team, this is who I want to go with. But also, let's not forget, Mark Carney had the most amount of caucus endorsements. Majority of caucus signed up to be on his team, and so they see something in him. They want to be noticed by him. Maybe they're looking for something to gain from him, if he ended up coming into the position that he's coming into. So that, I think, is going to be very interesting. Who among that group is going to be left disappointed? And if they are left disappointed in terms of not getting into that front bench, are they going to be more willing to speak up? Or are they just going to sit back and take one for the team because there is so much Liberal momentum right now? And you don't want to, are you going to be the one who's going to, be talking down the team when they have a shot at potentially remaining in government? So I think that might be really interesting, because there's been some moves already I think Mark Carney has disappointed some people on the Liberal team with regards to people maybe they wanted to see more of a separation from Team Trudeau, and that hasn't necessarily been the case. Bringing Marco Mendicino on as your interim transition chief of staff, that hasn't made everybody happy, those types of things.
Certainly Muslim staffers in the government are quite upset by that move.
Exactly. Yeah. So at what point do they say, okay, enough is enough? Or do they have to say, okay, but we actually have a shot at winning? So where is that balance going to be?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, they were looking at extinction before Christmas, and now, it's opposition and maybe, a shot at government, who knows? But Michelle, I wonder, and I'm jokingly putting you on the spot about Christy Clark, but do you think that's something she has talked about running in the next election, and she was a former premier and was contemplating the leadership? Do you think this is out of the realm of possibility that bringing in unelected people to staff up a cabinet when you still got a caucus north of 100, is that something we might see Friday?
Well, it's such a unique time, and I know we've said that 1,000 times, but I've run transitions before, and to do so in less than a week is madness to me. And there's so many decisions to be made. And on top of that, it's on the heels of what we're likely going to go into an election, everyone thinks, within the next 2 weeks. And so, Mr. Carney's got to have a really good balance here of, not to mention we're in a trade war with the United States, something that, an economic kind of uncertainty that we haven't seen in decades. So he's got to really balance putting his own mark on, no pun intended, his own mark on on what the government is. At the same time, keeping that kind of continuity so that relationships aren't lost at such a key time when we have to have those discussions with administration officials down south. And as well, put together a campaign team, recruiting candidates to be able to fight an election within a few weeks. And so I suspect that that they are working very hard on trying to put that balance together. And, it remains to be seen when they come out and how they do with striking that balance.
Michelle, someone who's a national campaign director in the past, these things like to be plotted. They like to be scripted. I don't know how you plot and script with Donald Trump. The dates I keep hearing is April 28th at the earliest, or May 5th for voting day, because there's issues around the Easter weekend and advance polls and how quickly they can be ready to go. How do you even run a campaign with this chaos and volatility coming at you from the White House every day?
Well, you have to rely on really great people, and everyone putting in as much their best efforts to focus in on what they are doing, and to not get caught up in the whirlwind of activity that is the kind of chaos agent of Donald Trump. Some people have to just be focused on putting the campaign logistics together. Some people just have to be focused on, the tour schedule, where they are going, and all of that. And above all, the campaign team has to be flexible because things are going to happen over the next, 60 days that no one is going to anticipate.
Right.
And they're just going to have to kind of react and hope that they're reacting in as thoughtful of a manner as it can be on very quick decisions that are being made.
Okay, we got about 5 minutes left. I just want to kind of get your thoughts on this. The polls are all moving, up and down. And Tim, it's tough to know exactly where things are, but I think we're probably in a margin of error race, I think, broadly speaking, between the Liberals and the Conservatives, or maybe a little bit outside of that, at least in vote share. Yep. Where do you think the ballot question is moving to right now in terms of, it was about affordability, it was about change, it was about this, it was about that, it's about Trump. Like, where do you think we're going on what's going to drive voters in the end?
12 hours before you go to the polls, what's on Truth Social it might be at this day and age. I mean, look, I think it most certainly is right now about how do we get through this? It's a bit COVIDian, right? And this is mostly Trump, but there's still a lot of people who are feeling it economically, and they're going to feel it more acutely if Donald Trump is there. And I think that is where this is going. I mean, it's fascinating to me, David. You hear conversations about tariffs in the weirdest places that you would never expect to hear political conversations. The other day in a dressing room in a U9 hockey tournament, you hear parents talking about, this is getting worse and what are we going to do? It's permeating everything. So it's hard. I said this last week, but it's hard not to imagine if this pace of Trump being Trump continues, that it isn't about this for Canadians. How do we find our way through this? It may not be who's best to lead us. It may be how do we find our way through this? And part of that exercise will be up to Pierre Poilievre, Mark Carney, Mr. Singh, Mr. Blanchet to a certain degree to make those arguments. But it's wild out there.
Yeah, Jordan, I had my car in for work the other day, and I walked in in the waiting room of the service department, a very intense conversation about strategic voting, where people saying you don't want a minority to deal with this guy. You need to have a majority. You got to decide who do you want it to be, and it's just wild to randomly see that. I mean, how do you think this is affecting where voters' headspace is at?
Yeah, for sure. This instability is having people look at federal politics, I think, for the first time very seriously in a long time. We had a 2-year period there where voters, by and large, were really just waiting to pass judgment on the Trudeau government. And we saw a reflection of that in the polls that were quite static with a really significant gap between the Conservatives and the Liberals that was 10 to 20 points over that period. All of that has now been upended. People are tuning in, they're paying attention, they're thinking about what the impacts of these tariffs might be on their lives, on their communities, on their jobs. And so they're looking at the options in front of them. And I think that, we definitely are seeing a lot of Liberal momentum right now. People are checking out Mark Carney. There's not a sense that people's opinions about him are baked in yet. So that's both an opportunity and a risk for the Liberals, and definitely an opportunity for the New Democrats and the Conservatives to make their own case about how they would handle Trump in this time. Yeah,
the Liberals have this weird cocktail of excitement and anxiety going on. Like, this is great, but is it solid, right? They don't know, Sherelle, right? Like, where this is going to go. I mean, how do you see this playing out in the coming weeks?
Yeah, did they peak too early? Is that the question? Is they're going to see all these gains that they've been so excited about? Or are they going to fall away as people get to know who Mark Carney is? Yes, they might have seen his Daily Show interview. They might have seen him on the debate stage. They might have maybe they tuned in and watched, his leadership speech. But they, by and large, they don't really know him as well as, obviously somebody like Justin Trudeau, who they know very, very well. And Mark Carney is not exactly giving people a really great opportunity to get to know him either. When you're walking past and turning away from local media, when you're going to communities, like he did today, that's not a great start. You want to be taking as much time as possible to say, hey, I'm here, I'm speaking to you, this is who I am, and because there's not a lot of runway here. So they're worried about, are people going to sign on? Are people going to tune in beyond, is this person best against Trump? Is this person best for the economy? Those are the types of opportunities they should be taking advantage of. Right.
So, Michelle, last word to you on this. So, as you look at the numbers and where they've moved around a bit, how solid do you think things are right now? How would you view this if you were getting ready to to go to Rideau Hall and ask for a dissolution of Parliament and get ready to go? I mean, what would you be looking at in the data that's out there right now?
What I would say is I think the pool of voters who would consider the Liberals is obviously infinitely larger. I think that right now the numbers are all soft, but I think that more Canadians are tuned into this than ever before. I would expect that there might even be a really, exceptionally high turnout in this election in terms of voting. I also do see it really polarizing between just the decision. Is Mark Carney the person who you want to be prime minister to deal with Donald Trump and reshape the economy, or is Pierre Poilievre? I think it might be a very, very sharp ballot question and not a lot of room for other players. I just do want to also say, though, Mark Carney is in a position where there can only be one prime minister. And so I would suspect that come the time when he is sworn in, if that's Friday, it will change a lot more and not walking away from media necessarily like he might have earlier today. Given where we are in this circumstance, you can only have one person speaking as prime minister of the country. And I think that deference for the next few days makes absolute sense. And I think that hopefully people will just hold their judgment on that part.
Yeah, right now it's Doug Ford, right? I'm just joking. That's a joke. That's a joke. But he's become a main character in this whole drama. It's remarkable to actually see it. All right, we're gonna leave it there. I want to thank you all. Michelle Cadario, Tim Powers, Jordan Leichtnitz, and Sherelle Evelyn.